Hey, does this one even understand where she is? Or did they drag her straight out of the gutter? A billionaire said that, in Russian, to a black waitress at one of Chicago's most expensive restaurants.
Good evening, sir. Welcome to the Meridian. Can I...
Oh, it talks.
He turned to his associate and
These
kept going
ones,
in Russian. These
they
ones,
smile,
they smile,
they
nod,
nod.
but there's nothing behind the eyes. He laughed.
I bet she doesn't even know who her father is.
His associate looked away. Nobody said a word. She stood there, notepad shaking in her hand. He spoke Russian so she wouldn't understand. But what came out of her mouth next made the entire restaurant stop breathing.
Wow, but that's not even the craziest part. Wait till you hear what happened after he walked out that door. Let me rewind 30 minutes. Before the billionaire, before the insult, before any of it. Brianna Ellison was standing in the staff hallway behind the kitchen. The espresso machine hoisted on the other side of the wall. Clattered plates. The smell of roasted bone marrow drifted through the door every time someone pushed it open. She straightened her apron, checked her notepad, slipped a small leather book deeper into her pocket, a phrase book, old and worn at the edges. She carried it every shift. Nobody ever asked about it. Wesley Grant, the sous chef, leaned through the kitchen pass. Heads up, B. Table 12 tonight is a VIP situation. Some billionaire and his crew. Big money, bad attitude. Brianna nodded. Got it. One more thing, Wesley said. The hostess told me he asked for a more experienced server. His words. Brianna didn't react. She'd heard that kind of request before. She knew what more experienced usually meant. That's when Ted Ashworth walked in. Ted owned the Meridian. 62 years old, trained diplomat, the kind of man who never raised his voice because he never needed to. Every staff member respected him, not because he demanded it, but because he earned it every single day. Ted looked at the hostess. Who's on table 12 tonight? Brianna, sir, but the guest requested. Brianna handles my best tables. She stays. That was it. No debate, no discussion. He said it the way you say the sky is blue. Then he walked away. Brianna headed toward the dining room. On her way through, she passed a French couple near the entrance. They were trying to explain a food allergy to the busboy, stumbling through broken English, getting nowhere. Brianna stopped, leaned in, and spoke to them in perfect French. Fluent, Parisian accent, clean grammar. She explained the allergen information, answered their questions, and smiled. The couple stared at her like she'd just performed a magic trick. She moved on. Didn't think twice about it. To her, it was nothing special. Nobody on the staff knew how many languages Brianna Ellison spoke. She never told them. And she was about to walk straight into table 12. Now, let me tell you what Gregory Holt said when Brianna wasn't supposed to understand. It didn't start with one insult. It was a whole performance. The moment she walked up to table 12, Holt glanced at her for half a second. Then he turned to his associate, Philip Townsend, and switched to Russian. Finally, they sent the girl. Townsend smiled but said nothing. Holt kept going. He told Nadia, his Russian-born assistant sitting next to him, that he didn't need to waste good manners on the help. He said Brianna probably grew up in a neighborhood where people shoot each other over sneakers. He said he could smell poverty on her from across the table. Nadia looked down at her plate. She didn't laugh. She didn't say a word. Brianna stood there the whole time, notepad ready, face calm, eyes steady. She understood every single syllable, but she didn't react. Not yet. She took their orders, appetizers, entrees, read the specials without a single stumble,
professional, polished, like nothing happened. Then came the wine. Holt leaned back in his chair and told Townsend, still in Russian, to just pick any bottle. Order whatever. She won't know the difference between Bordeaux and bath water. Townsend laughed, a short, nervous laugh. And that's when Brianna opened her mouth. In Russian. Perfect, fluent, accent-precise Russian. Actually, sir, I'd recommend the 2016 Chateau Margaux. It pairs beautifully with the lamb, and I believe you'll find it more refined than the Montrachet you ordered last time you dined here, Mr. Holt. She said it the way you'd recommend the weather. Calm, warm, not a single crack in her voice. The table went dead silent. Holt's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Townsend put down his glass so slowly you could hear his fingers slide off the crystal. Nadia, the assistant, covered her mouth with her hand. Her eyes were wide, not from fear, from shock. Nobody moved. The couple at the next table, they'd heard the Russian earlier, turned around and stared. A man at the bar set down his drink. A waiter near the kitchen froze mid-step. The silence didn't just sit at table 12. It spread. It moved across the dining room like a wave rolling through still water. Table after table, people looked over. They didn't know exactly what had happened, but they felt it. Something in the air had shifted. And Brianna? She just stood there, notepad ready, pen in hand, waiting for their order. She didn't smirk. She didn't gloat. She didn't even raise her voice. She just looked Gregory Holt dead in the eye and waited. The man who had used Russian like a weapon to mock her, to degrade her, to say things about her skin and her family and her worth. That man was now sitting in complete silence because the woman he called the help just spoke his language better than he did and recommended a better wine. Here's what most people would have done in that moment. They would have exploded. They would have shouted. They would have made a scene and walked out. Brianna didn't do any of that. She stood at that table like she belonged there more than anyone else in the room. Because she did. And the craziest part? Nobody at the Meridian knew she could speak Russian. Nobody knew she spoke French either, except for that couple near the entrance who were still whispering about her. Nobody knew about the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Mandarin, or the Arabic. 7 languages, all living inside a 26-year-old waitress making $11 an hour. Gregory Holt picked up his napkin, pressed it against his lip, and for the first time in maybe 20 years, he had absolutely nothing to say. But don't think for a second this was over, because a man like Holt, he doesn't get embarrassed. He gets even. And what he did next, that's where this story really begins. Yo, are you seeing this? She didn't scream, didn't curse. She just answered in his own language and picked a better wine. That's not just fluency. That's a whole different level. Now imagine being that good and still getting treated like dirt. Nah, that hits different. Let me take you back. Before the restaurant, before the apron, before any of it. Brianna Ellison grew up on the south side of Chicago. Small apartment, thin walls. Her mother, Corinne Davis, worked double shifts as a night nurse at Cook County Hospital. Most nights, Brianna fell asleep to the sound of the front door closing and her mother's footsteps disappearing down the hallway. But her grandfather, he was different. Every Sunday afternoon,
He'd sit on the porch with Brianna on his knee. He was a retired postal worker, train army, served overseas across Europe, Germany, France, Italy. And everywhere he went, he learned the language, not from textbooks, from people, from soldiers, from strangers at bus stops and bakeries. He spoke 5 languages. A black man from the south side of Chicago with no college degree, and he could hold a conversation in 5 different tongues. He gave Brianna a small leather phrase book when she was 8 years old. Russian phrases, dog-eared pages, pencil notes in the margins. He told her one thing she never forgot. Language is the one door nobody can lock on you. He died when she was 14. She kept the book. She still carries it. Every single shift tucked right there in her apron pocket. After high school, Brianna got a scholarship to study linguistics at the University of Chicago. Top of her class. Professors called her gifted. 2 years in, her mother got sick. Hospital bills ate through everything. The scholarship wasn't enough. She dropped out. No degree, no connections, no safety net. She applied to 6 translation firms. All 6 rejected her. Same reason every time. No credentials. Didn't matter that she could outperform half their staff. On paper, she didn't exist. So she tied an apron around her waist. Took a job at the Meridian. $11 an hour plus tips. She studied languages on her own. Library books, free apps, conversation groups at the community center. 7 languages. Fluent. All self-built. And every night before her shift, she touched that little leather book in her pocket. Her grandfather's voice still in her ear. Nobody at work ever asked what she was capable of. Not once. Back at table 12, Gregory Holt sat in silence for exactly 11 seconds. 11 seconds. That's how long it took for his ego to reboot. He put down his napkin, straightened his cuffs, and decided that what just happened didn't happen. He flagged down the floor manager, a young guy in a black vest who appeared at the table like he'd been summoned by a fire alarm. "I need to speak to whoever runs this place," Holt said, in English this time, loud enough for the tables nearby to hear. "Is there a problem, sir?" "The problem is your waitress. She was rude. She overstepped. I want someone else on this table. Now." The floor manager opened his mouth, closed it, looked toward the kitchen. He had no idea what to do. That's when Ted Ashworth appeared. He didn't rush, didn't hurry. He walked to table 12 the way a man walks when he's been handling difficult people for 40 years. Hands behind his back, shoulders straight, face completely calm. "Mr. Holt, I'm Ted Ashworth. I own the Meridian. I understand there's a concern." Holt leaned forward. "Your girl, she was out of line. I don't need a waitress trying to show off. I asked for someone experienced. Instead, you sent me that." Ted didn't blink. "Mr. Holt, Brianna is one of the most capable people in this building. If she offered a wine recommendation, I'd trust it over my own sommeliers." He paused. "She stays on your table. No anger. No apologies. Just fact. The way you say water is wet. The way you say the earth is round." Holt stared at him. He wasn't used to hearing no. Not from employees, not from business partners, and definitely not from a restaurant owner standing in front of 100 guests. But Ted had already turned and walked away. Holt sat there for a long time. His jaw worked side to side. Then he made a decision. If he couldn't get rid of Brianna, he'd break her. When she came back to the table, he was ready. He fired questions at her in Russian, quick, complex, technical. "What region produces the best saparavi? What's the proper temperature for serving kvass? Tell me the difference between solyanka and borscht in detail, one after another, like a machine gun. Brianna answered every single one. Not just answered, expanded. She told him about the clay soil in the Kakheti wine region of Georgia that gives Saperavi its depth. She explained the etymology of a Russian culinary term he'd used incorrectly. She corrected his pronunciation, gently, on a word he'd been saying wrong his entire life. Holt's face went from smug to stiff to something else entirely. Something he probably hadn't felt since he was a kid getting scolded by a teacher. The staff noticed. A busboy near the window stopped wiping at a table. 2 servers stood frozen by the bar. Wesley Grant watched from the kitchen pass, his mouth half open. He grabbed the cook next to him. "Did you know she could do that?" The cook shook his head slowly. Wesley looked back at Brianna through the pass. The girl he'd worked beside for 2 years, the girl who clocked in, tied her apron, served her tables, and went home. He thought he knew her. He didn't know anything. And Holt? He was quiet again. But this time, his eyes had changed. This wasn't embarrassing anymore. This was a man deciding how to hit back. To understand what Gregory Holt did next, you need to understand how his mind works. Holt didn't build a real estate empire by being polite. He built it by knowing who belongs where. That was his whole system. His entire world ran on a single belief. Some people are above, some people are below, and the ones below should stay there. He learned Russian in Moscow boardrooms, closed deals in St. Petersburg with men who drank vodka at noon and signed contracts by dinner. To him, Russian wasn't just a language. It was a private club, a locked room, a space where only certain people were allowed. And now, a black waitress from the south side of Chicago had walked straight through that door. That didn't impress him. It offended him. It cracked the walls of everything he believed about how the world was supposed to work. While Holt sat at his table stewing, something else was happening across the dining room. Nadia Petrov, his assistant, excused herself, said she needed the restroom. But she didn't go to the restroom. She found Brianna in the hallway near the bar station. Nadia spoke quietly, in Russian. "Your pronunciation is better than his. You know that, right?" Brianna looked at her, surprised. Not by the compliment, by the honesty. Nadia kept going. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. "I've worked for him for 3 years. I've watched him talk like this to people in Moscow, in London, in New York, every city, every country, always the same." Brianna was quiet for a moment. Then she answered, also in Russian, "You don't have to apologize for him." Nadia's eyes filled with water. She nodded once. Then she turned and walked back to table 12. Meanwhile, the dining room had started to shift. Elena Moore, a woman in her 40s, sitting 2 tables away, leaned toward her companion. "Did that waitress just speak Russian to him?" Her companion nodded, fluently. Whispers moved from table to table, not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet hum of people slowly realizing they were watching something they'd never seen before. The power in that room was changing. Not through a fight, not through a scene, just through the slow, undeniable visibility of someone who was never supposed to be visible. And then there was Brianna. After Nadia walked away, Brianna stood alone at the bar station. She was restocking glasses. Her hands moved on autopilot. Pick up, place. Pick up, place. But her fingers were shaking. Not from fear, not from anger, from exhaustion. She pressed her hip against the counter and felt the leather phrase book shift in her apron pocket. She didn't take it out. She just felt it there, the weight of it, the familiar shape against her body. The hardest part wasn't the insult.
It was that she'd heard versions of it her entire life. Different words, different languages, but always the same message. You don't belong here. You're not enough. Stay in your lane. In English, in French, in the silence of 6 rejection letters from 6 translation firms. Always the same. She took a breath, placed the last glass on the rack, straightened her apron. Then she walked back toward the dining room. Because that's what Brianna Ellison did every single day. She absorbed it, she carried it, and she kept moving. But tonight, something in the air felt different. The whispers hadn't stopped. The eyes hadn't looked away. And somewhere in the back of the restaurant, a phone was ringing. A crisis was about to land on Ted Ashworth's desk. One that only Brianna could solve. The phone call came at 8:47 p.m. A party of Brazilian diplomats had arrived for a private partnership dinner in the Meridian's back room. 8 guests. High-level cultural foundation meeting. Everything arranged weeks in advance. One problem. The interpreter didn't show up. No call, no text, no explanation. Just an empty chair where the interpreter was supposed to sit. The maitre d' was standing in the hallway with a phone in one hand and a seating chart in the other. His face was the color of old paper. "They speak Portuguese," he said to the floor manager. "Limited English. The foundation director is already asking questions. If we can't communicate with them, this whole event falls apart." The floor manager looked at him. "So, what do we do?" "I have no idea." Ted Ashworth heard the commotion from across the dining room. He walked over, listened, asked 2 questions. Then he stopped talking. He looked across the restaurant. His eyes landed on Brianna. She was clearing a table near the window, stacking plates, moving the way she always moved, quiet, efficient, invisible. Ted walked to her. He didn't rush. He spoke low enough that only she could hear. "Brianna, how's your Portuguese?" She looked at him. "Fluent. Brazilian dialect." He paused. Just for a second. Then he said something that mattered more than the question itself. "Would you be willing to help? I won't ask you to do anything beyond your comfort." She held his gaze. "I'll do it." She untied her apron, folded it neatly on the bar counter, touched the phrase book in her pocket, just barely, just with her fingertips, and walked toward the back room. The doors opened. 8 Brazilian diplomats sat around a long table. Crystal glasses, white orchids in the center. The foundation director, an older man in a gray suit, was mid-conversation with his colleague, frustration all over his face. Brianna stepped in. "Good evening. My name is Brianna. I'll be assisting with interpretation tonight." She said it in Portuguese. Warm, relaxed. The kind of Brazilian Portuguese you hear in Sao Paulo living rooms. Not textbooks. The diplomats looked up. One by one, their faces changed. The frustration melted. The foundation director leaned back in his chair and smiled. "Finally," he said in Portuguese, "someone who speaks like a human being." The whole table laughed. For the next 45 minutes, Brianna ran that room. She translated conversations. She clarified cultural references the Americans didn't catch. She mediated a misunderstanding about event protocol that could have derailed the entire dinner. She did it all without a single note, without a single hesitation. The foundation director kept glancing at her between courses. Not like Holt looked at her. Not like she was furniture. He looked at her the way you look at someone who just saved your evening. And across the restaurant, through a glass partition that separated the dining room from the back, Gregory Holt was watching. He could see everything. He could see his waitress, his help, standing at the head of a table full of diplomats,
commanding the room, speaking a language he didn't even recognize, moving with the same calm, steady presence she'd shown at his own table. Except now, nobody was laughing at her. They were listening to her. Philip Townsend leaned over to Holt. "Greg, who is that woman?" Holt didn't answer. He picked up his wine glass, took a long sip, and said nothing. But his hand, wrapped around the stem of that glass, was white at the knuckles. Because now he had a new problem. It's hard to call someone the help when the whole room just watched her do something you never could. The diplomat dinner ended at 9:32 p.m. 8 handshakes, 3 business cards exchanged. The foundation director held Brianna's hand with both of his and said, in Portuguese, "You made tonight possible." She smiled, nodded. Then she walked back through the glass doors into the main dining room. The apron was still folded on the bar counter where she'd left it. She picked it up, tied it back on, touched the phrase book in her pocket. And just like that, she was a waitress again. But Ted Ashworth was waiting for her. He was standing near the hallway that led to his office, arms at his sides, no clipboard, no phone, just standing there like a man who had something important to say and wanted to get it exactly right. "Brianna, come with me for a moment." She followed him into his office. Small room, wooden desk, a framed certificate on the wall from his diplomatic years, some kind of cross-cultural excellence award. Bookshelves lined with titles in French and German. A single lamp casting warm light across everything. Ted sat on the edge of his desk. He didn't sit behind it. He sat on the edge, facing her, like an equal. That was the most impressive thing I've seen in 30 years of running this place. She didn't respond. She wasn't used to hearing words like that. He let the silence sit. Then he asked a question nobody had ever asked her at work. "How many languages, Brianna?" 7. He absorbed that, didn't gasp, didn't overreact, just nodded slowly, the way a man nods when something he suspected turns out to be true. "Why are you waiting tables?" And there it was, the question that cut through everything. She told him. The scholarship, the drop degree, her mother's illness, the hospital bills, the 6 rejections, all of it, in less than 2 minutes, standing in a restaurant office at 9:30 on a Friday night. Ted listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't tilt his head with pity. He just listened, the way someone listens when they actually care about the answer. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said this. "I spent 20 years in diplomacy. I still have contacts. State Department, UN liaison offices, international NGOs, people who need exactly what you can do." He paused. "I've known interpreters with half your skill earning 6 figures. The world wastes talent like this every single day, and I refuse to be part of it." He wasn't offering charity. He was offering a door. The kind of door her grandfather told her about. The one nobody can lock. Brianna looked at him. Her eyes were steady, but something behind them shifted. Something old and tired and carefully guarded began to crack. Just a little. She didn't say yes. Not yet. Years of rejection had taught her not to trust moments like this. She touched the phrase book in her pocket. Maybe it was time to stop carrying her grandfather's words alone. Maybe it was time someone else finally heard them. Brianna stepped out of Ted's office and walked straight into Elena Moore. Elena was standing near the bar station. Mid-40s, sharp blazer, the kind of woman who looked like she ran something. Because she did. "I'm sorry to stop you," Elena said, My name is Elena Moore. I run a foundation that funds language education in underserved neighborhoods here in Chicago. Brianna nodded. Polite. Guarded. I heard you speak Russian to that man at table 12, Elena continued, and I just watched you walk into that back room and interpret for an entire diplomatic dinner. She paused. Have you ever considered teaching? Brianna blinked. The question hit her somewhere she wasn't expecting. I never thought anyone would want me to. Elena held her gaze for a long moment. Then she pulled a card from her purse and placed it in Brianna's hand. Call me Monday. I'm serious. Before Brianna could respond, another voice came from behind her. Nadia Petrov. This time, Nadia wasn't hiding in the hallway. She was standing right there in the middle of the dining room, in full view of everyone. She handed Brianna a business card, her personal card, not Holt's company. She spoke in Russian, quietly but clearly. I know people in Moscow who would hire you tomorrow. Don't let him make you small. Then she turned and walked back to table 12 without looking back. 2 women, 2 cards, 2 doors opening in the span of 60 seconds. Brianna stood there, holding both cards. She didn't move. Then a hand touched her shoulder. Wesley. He'd come out of the kitchen, still wearing his chef's coat, flower on his sleeve. His eyes were red. 2 years, B. His voice cracked. 2 years we've worked together. I stood right next to you, every shift, and I didn't know. Why didn't you ever say anything? Brianna looked at him, her best friend at this job, the guy who shared his lunch with her, who covered her tables when she was running late, who told her jokes during the slow shifts. She shrugged. Nobody asked. 2 words, that's all she said. Nobody asked. Wesley pulled her into a hug, tight, the kind you give when words aren't enough. Behind them, through the kitchen pass, the line cooks were watching. One of them started clapping, slow, steady. Then another joined, then another. It built from the kitchen outward until Brianna could feel it in her chest. She laughed, a real laugh, the first one all night. But the night wasn't over, because Gregory Holt was still sitting at table 12, and he was about to make his final move. Gregory Holt had been sitting at table 12 for over 2 hours, 2 hours of being outsmarted, outspoken, outclassed by a woman he'd called the help. He was done being quiet. He flagged down the floor manager again. But this time, he didn't ask for a new server. He didn't file a complaint. He did something worse. He raised his voice. I want to speak to the owner. Now. Right now. The tables around him went still. Forks paused. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. When a man like Gregory Holt raises his voice in a place like the Meridian, people listen. The floor manager nodded and disappeared. Holt didn't wait. He stood up, pushed his chair back, and said, loud enough for half the restaurant to hear, "This is ridiculous. I come here to have a meal, and instead I get a waitress who abandons my table to go play translator in the back room." He straightened his jacket. She wasn't hired to network. She wasn't hired to show off. She was hired to bring plates and pour wine. That's it. Townsend stared at his bread plate. Nadia looked at the window. Neither of them said a word. Then Holt delivered the line that sealed everything. People should know their place. He said it the way you say something you've believed your entire life. Not angry, not emotional, just certain. Like gravity, like a law of nature. The dining room was completely silent. And then Ted Ashworth walked out. He appeared from the hallway near the kitchen. Same calm walk, same straight shoulders, same steady eyes. He crossed the dining room without rushing, every step deliberate, every pair of eyes in the room following him. He stopped at table 12. "Mr. Holt, you wanted to speak with me." "Yes, I did." Holt pointed toward the back room. "Your waitress left my table, to go translate for some event in your back room. That's unacceptable. That's not her job." Ted nodded, listening, the way a diplomat listens, fully, completely, without interruption. Then he spoke. "Mr. Holt, 45 minutes ago, a diplomatic event in our private dining room was about to collapse. No interpreter, 8 foreign guests, a major cultural partnership on the line." He paused. "Brianna Ellison, the woman you've been insulting all evening, walked into that room and single-handedly saved it. She interpreted an entire dinner in fluent Portuguese, Brazilian dialect, without a single note." Another pause. "She also speaks Russian, French, Spanish, Mandarin, and Arabic. 7 languages, all self-taught, while working full-time, while supporting her mother, while being told over and over that she wasn't qualified." The room was so quiet you could hear the candles flicker. Ted took one step closer to Holt. "You came into my restaurant and insulted one of the most talented people I've ever employed, in a language she speaks better than you do." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "If anyone here needs to know their place, Mr. Holt, it isn't her." Silence. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. Then Elena Moore started clapping. Alone at first, just her hands, slow and steady. Then the French couple near the entrance joined. The woman was crying. Then the bartender. Then a man in a gray suit by the window. Then a couple near the back wall who'd been watching everything since the finger snap. Table by table, person by person, the applause moved across that dining room like a wave. Not loud, not wild, not a standing ovation at a concert. This was different. This was deliberate. This was 120 people saying, "We saw everything. We heard everything. And we're choosing her side." Nadia Petrov stood up from table 12. She pushed her chair back, stepped away from Holt, and turned to face Brianna. She clapped. Slowly. Standing apart from the man who'd signed her paychecks for 3 years. Townsend didn't clap. He sat, frozen, eyes locked on the tablecloth. His bread was untouched. His wine was warm. And Gregory Holt? The blood drained from his face. His hand gripped the napkin so hard his knuckles turned white. His eyes darted around the room, left, right, behind him, looking for a single ally. He found none. Not one person in that restaurant was on his side. This was a man who'd closed deals worth hundreds of millions. A man who'd stared down oligarchs and senators and never blinked. A man who believed, truly, deeply believed, that money made him untouchable. And now he was standing in a dining room full of strangers who had just chosen a waitress over him. Not because anyone threatened him, not because anyone yelled, because everyone simply chose not to look away. Brianna stood near the bar station. She hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. The applause washed over her, and she let it. Her hands were still. Her jaw was relaxed. Her eyes were clear. She didn't smile triumphantly. She didn't cry. She touched the phrase book in her pocket. Just once. Just with her fingertips. Then she walked to table 12. The applause faded as she moved, step by step. The click of her shoes on marble, the same sound from the beginning of the night,
the same walk, the same woman. But everything had changed. She set down the check, looked Gregory Holt in the eye, and said, in English, calm as still water, "Thank you for dining with us, Mr. Holt. I hope you enjoyed the Chateau Margaux." The same wine she'd recommended in Russian at the start of the evening. The same moment. Full circle. Then she turned, and she walked away. Holt didn't say a word. He reached into his jacket, pulled out his wallet, dropped $300 bills on the table, no tip, and stood up. He walked toward the exit without looking at anyone. Townsend followed, 2 steps behind. Nadia stayed where she was. The door closed behind him, and the dining room exhaled. Like 120 people had been holding their breath for 2 hours, and finally, let it go. But this story isn't about Gregory Holt leaving. It's about what happened after he was gone. The moment Holt walked out that door, the dining room changed. It was like someone had opened a window in a room that had been sealed shut all night. People started breathing again. Conversations resumed. But they were different now. Quieter. Warmer. Like everyone in that room shared something they hadn't shared an hour ago. Elena Moore was the first to move. She stood up from her table, crossed the dining room, and found Brianna near the kitchen entrance. She didn't waste time. I meant what I said earlier. I run language programs in 12 schools across the South Side. We've never had a teacher who speaks more than 2 languages. You speak 7. She pressed her business card into Brianna's hand again, firmer this time. Call me Monday, not because I feel sorry for you, because I need you. Brianna looked down at the card. Her thumb ran across the printed letters. She nodded. Behind Elena, 2 more people approached. One was a travel executive, a man in his 50s who'd been sitting near the bar all evening. He handed Brianna his card and said he was looking for multilingual staff for his company's international division. The other was a woman who didn't have a card, didn't have a title. She just wanted to shake Brianna's hand. "I've been coming here for 6 years," the woman said. "Tonight is the first time I'll remember." Then the restaurant slowly emptied. Coats retrieved. Bills settled. Cars pulled up to the curb outside. One by one, the tables cleared. The candles burned low. The last guests left. The Meridian went quiet. Closing time. The staff moved through their routines, wiping down tables, stacking chairs, polishing glasses. But there was a hum underneath it all, a frequency, something unspoken that everyone felt but nobody tried to name. Ted Ashworth appeared in the hallway outside his office. "Brianna, 1 more minute." She followed him in. The office looked the same as before. The warm lamp, the bookshelves, the framed certificate on the wall. But this time, Ted opened a drawer in his desk. He pulled out a small box. Dark blue. Velvet. He opened it. Inside was a gold pin, shaped like a compass rose, small enough to fit in your palm. The kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't looking. But once you saw it, you couldn't look away. "A mentor gave me this 30 years ago," Ted said, "when I was a young diplomat. I'd just handled a crisis negotiation in Geneva. Everyone said I was too inexperienced, too green, too new. But I did it anyway." He turned the pin over in his fingers. "He told me the compass rose doesn't point to where you've been. It points to where you're supposed to go." He stepped forward and pinned it to Brianna's apron, right next to the pocket where the phrasebook sat. "You don't need a degree to prove what you are. But the world needs to catch up to you. Let me help with that." Brianna looked down at the pin. Gold against black fabric. Tiny, but bright. Right next to her grandfather's book. She didn't cry, but her breath caught. Just for a second. Just enough. "Thank you," she said,
barely above a whisper. Ted nodded once. Then he left the room. No big speech, no dramatic exit. Just a man who saw someone clearly and acted on it. Brianna stood alone in the office for a moment. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out the phrase book. She opened it to the first page. The handwriting was shaky, pencil on yellowed paper, her grandfather's hand, unsteady from age but deliberate in every stroke. For Bree, learn every word, then teach them to someone. She ran her thumb across the ink, slowly, the way you touch something sacred. 18 years she'd carried this book. Through school, through the scholarship, through dropping out, through the rejection letters, through every shift at the Meridian. 18 years of holding on to a voice that had gone silent. And tonight, for the first time, the book didn't feel like a memory. It felt like a beginning. The months that followed moved fast. Brianna started teaching weekend language classes at Elena Moore's foundation. Her first group, 12 kids from Englewood, ages 9 to 14, mostly Black and Latino. Kids from families where nobody owned a passport. Kids who'd never left Chicago. She taught them Russian first. One of the kids raised his hand on the first day. Why Russian? Nobody here speaks Russian. Brianna smiled. Because it's the hardest one. And you should always start with a thing people say you can't do. The room went quiet. Then one girl in the back row sat up a little straighter. Ted's contacts opened doors. Real doors. Within 3 months, Brianna was offered a contract position with an international trade consultancy. Part-time, flexible, the kind of work that used every language she spoke. She accepted, but she didn't quit the Meridian. She kept one shift a week, Friday nights. Wesley asked her why. Keeps me grounded, she said. Reminds me where I started. She still wore the apron. The phrase book still sat in the pocket. And now, right next to it, the compass rose. As for Gregory Holt, 6 months later, a business journal ran a profile on his latest deal, a real estate partnership in Eastern Europe. It had collapsed. Former associates were quoted in the article. They cited his inability to work with local partners and his dismissive interpersonal style. The article didn't mention the Meridian. It didn't mention Brianna. It didn't need to. Some things don't need to be said out loud. They just catch up to you. And on a Saturday morning in spring, in a small classroom on the south side of Chicago, a 12-year-old girl stood up in front of her classmates. She cleared her throat, looked at Brianna, and said, in careful, halting, but perfect Russian, "My name is Destiny. I am from Chicago, and I am learning every word." Brianna smiled. Not the polite smile she gave guests at the Meridian. Not the guarded smile she wore when strangers asked what she did for a living. This one was real. It started in her eyes and moved outward, slow and warm, until it filled the whole room. She looked at Destiny, and for just a second, she saw herself. 8 years old, sitting on a porch, a leather book in her hands, a voice in her ear saying, "Learn every word, then teach them to someone." Here's the thing about Brianna Ellison. She wasn't hiding. She was never hiding. She was right there, in plain sight, every single day. Tying her apron, carrying plates, pouring wine, saying good evening to people who looked right through her. 7 languages lived inside that woman, 7 entire worlds, and nobody knew. Not because she was ashamed, but because nobody thought to ask a waitress what she was capable of. And that's not just Brianna's story. That's everywhere. The cashier at your grocery store, who has an engineering degree from another country. the janitor at your office, who can solve equations your manager can't. The Uber driver, who was a surgeon back home. We see the uniform. We see the name tag. And we decide, in half a second, what that person is worth. We do it without thinking, without meaning to, without even realizing it. But the cost is real. Linguistic researchers have found that multilingual individuals in service sector jobs are among the most underemployed populations in the country. Thousands of fluent speakers, people who can interpret, translate, negotiate across cultures, work jobs that never touch their abilities. Not because they lack talent, because they lack a piece of paper with a stamp on it. That's not a talent gap. That's a recognition gap. And it starts with us. It starts with the moment we decide, based on someone's job title, their clothes, their skin, their accent, that we already know who they are. Gregory Holt looked at Brianna and saw a waitress. That's all he allowed himself to see. And because of that, he missed what was standing right in front of him. The most capable person in the room. But Ted Ashworth didn't miss it. He looked at the same woman and saw something worth fighting for. Not because he was special, because he paid attention, because he asked. That's the difference. One man looked, the other one saw. So here's what I want you to do. And it's small. It's so small it might feel like nothing. Next time you're at a restaurant, a coffee shop, a checkout line, anywhere someone is serving you, ask them something real. Not, how's your day? Something real. Ask them what they studied. Ask them what they're working toward. Ask them what they know that nobody knows they know. You might be standing in front of the most remarkable person you'll meet this year. And you would never, ever know it unless you asked. Because talent doesn't announce itself. It doesn't wear a sign. It doesn't come with a title or a corner office or a degree on the wall. Sometimes it comes in an apron, with a notepad, and a worn-out leather book in the pocket. We need to build real paths for people like Brianna. Skills-first hiring, language proficiency assessments, talent auditions that don't require a 4-year degree to walk through the door. Some organizations are already doing this work, but it's not enough. Not yet. Every time we reduce a person to a job title, we lose something we can't measure. Every time we look past someone because of where they come from, we miss what they could become. Brianna's grandfather gave her a phrase book and a single piece of advice. Learn every word, then teach them to someone. She did both. And right now, in a classroom on the south side of Chicago, 12 kids are learning Russian. Not because they need it, because someone finally told them they could. The most powerful language in any room is the one nobody expected you to speak. Man, imagine speaking 7 languages and still being called the help. Put yourself in her shoes. Would you keep going? That's why I tell these stories. Drop a comment, like, share, subscribe. These stories need to be heard.